My family ruined every moment of my life for my sister, so I disappeared without warning. After 33 years of being their backup plan, I finally walked away. My family completely took over my vacation plans so my golden child sister and her kids could benefit, but this time I had a secret escape plan of my own. I really need some outside perspective because I've been dealing with this family situation for decades, and it's finally reached a breaking point. It's a long story, but I hope someone can help me make sense of it. Even though I grew up in what looked like a normal suburban family in Ohio, my experience behind closed doors was anything but ordinary. From the outside, we probably seemed like any other family on our street, with a tidy lawn, a minivan in the driveway, and holiday decorations that went up right on schedule every year. But inside those walls, the dynamic was something entirely different, something that took me years to even fully recognize, let alone put into words. I'm a 33-year-old woman, and for as long as I can remember, I've lived in the shadow of one person. That person has always been my older sister, Laura, who is now 40. Our entire house felt like a shrine dedicated to Laura. Every wall displayed her awards, photos, and accomplishments, and nearly every conversation revolved around whatever was happening in her life. One memory has never left me. When I turned 9, my parents were so busy preparing for Laura's college interviews that they completely forgot to buy me a birthday cake. Instead, they actually tried to give me the leftover cake from Laura's graduation, complete with her name still written across the frosting, and expected me to smile and accept it as my birthday cake. I remember staring at the icing, at her name spelled out in blue gel letters, and trying to figure out how to feel grateful for something that so clearly wasn't mine. Nobody in the room seemed to notice anything strange about it. To them, a cake was a cake, and I was simply expected to blow out candles on a dessert celebrating someone else's milestone. As we got older, every achievement I earned was overshadowed by something Laura had done. When I made the honor roll in middle school, my parents barely noticed because Laura had just been chosen for the debate team. Later, when I won a local painting competition in high school, they skipped the ceremony because they were busy taking Laura on another college tour. Before long, I stopped sharing my accomplishments altogether. I knew the best I could hope for was a quick, distracted, "That's nice, dear," before the conversation immediately shifted back to Laura. I started keeping report cards and certificates tucked away in a desk drawer instead of showing them to anyone, because putting them on display only seemed to invite indifference. Eventually, I learned to celebrate my successes alone in my room, because no one else seemed to care, sometimes treating myself to a small snack or a favorite show, just so the moment felt like it mattered to somebody, even if that somebody was only me. Even the things we owned reflected exactly where I stood in the family. Laura always received the newest electronics, fashionable clothes, and whatever equipment she needed for her endless extracurricular activities. Meanwhile, my room was filled with her leftovers. When I wanted to take music lessons, I was handed Laura's old violin instead of getting one that actually fit me. I wore her old clothes, used her old school supplies, and made do with whatever she no longer wanted. The violin was much too large for me, and when I asked if I could have one that fit properly, my mother simply said, "We already spent so much on Laura's piano lessons this year." I spent months awkwardly adjusting my grip and my posture just to compensate for an instrument that was never built for someone my size, and eventually my music teacher gently suggested that maybe the violin simply wasn't for me. Looking back, it was never really about talent at all. It was about the fact that I was always working with tools meant for someone else's hands. Nothing changed once we reached high school. While Laura had private tutoring to prepare for her SAT exams, I relied on borrowed library books because that was all I had. I spent hours in the public library after school, working through practice questions on my own with no one to explain the ones I got wrong, while Laura had a tutor coming to the house twice a week. My parents even took out a loan so she could have a car for college, but when I needed transportation, they told me to ride the bus, waking up an hour earlier every morning just to make it to school on time. Every financial decision, every family discussion, and every holiday centered around what Laura wanted or needed. Everyone else simply adjusted around her. College only made the difference between us even more obvious. My parents proudly supported Laura while she attended a prestigious university and earned her degree. When it came time for me to go to school, they said they could only cover half of my tuition at a state university. They reminded me they were still paying off Laura's student loans and told me I'd have to figure out the rest by myself. To survive, I worked 2 part-time jobs while taking classes, and many nights I fell asleep with my textbooks still open in front of me, waking up in the early morning hours to finish an assignment and before my first shift started. I remember eating cheap instant noodles for weeks at a time just to stretch my budget, and skipping campus events that everyone else seemed to enjoy because I simply didn't have the time or the money. Meanwhile, Laura started her career in a position our parents had helped her secure through their professional connections, walking straight into a job that people usually spent years working toward. 7 years ago, Laura got married, and somehow everything became even more centered around her. For an entire year, our family focused on nothing except planning her dream wedding. She had a designer dress, an extravagant venue, and a guest list with more than 250 people. Even though my parents were already worried about money, they took out yet another loan to pay for it. I still remember overhearing them talking in the kitchen about the payments, only to hear them insist that nothing was too expensive for Laura's special day. There were tastings for 3 different caterers, fittings that stretched on for hours, and endless debates over floral arrangements that all seemed to matter enormously to everyone but me. I sat through most of those planning sessions quietly, nodding along, wondering what it would feel like to have even a fraction of that energy directed towards something in my own life. Naturally, I was expected to be her maid of honor. That meant organizing bridal showers, planning an elaborate bachelorette party, and handling every little crisis that came up along the way. Whenever I admitted I was overwhelmed trying to balance all of that while working a full-time job, my mother would immediately shut me down. She'd say, "Don't be selfish, Emily. This is your sister's special time." Not long after the wedding, Laura announced she was pregnant with twins, and my parents couldn't have been happier. Even though they were still paying off the wedding loan, they somehow found the money to help Laura and her husband buy a house close to theirs. I watched them dip into the retirement savings they had always claimed were unavailable when I needed help paying for college. When I pointed out the contradiction, they brushed it aside by saying, "This is different. This is for our grandchildren." And guess who instantly became the default babysitter? That would be me. At first, it was just the occasional favor. Laura would ask, "Emily, can you watch the boys for a couple of hours?" Before long, those occasional requests became weekly expectations. Then the afternoons turned into evenings whenever she had appointments, or simply wanted time for herself. My parents constantly defended the arrangement by saying, "This is what family does." Laura and her husband, Ryan, who is now 41, acted as though I was permanently on call whenever they needed childcare. I truly love my nephews, and now that they're energetic 6-year-olds, they're wonderful kids. But they're also exhausting. Every weekend follows the exact same pattern. Laura shows up at my apartment with little or no warning, usually claiming she has important errands or desperately needs some personal time. Within minutes, the boys have turned my small apartment upside down. Toys, food, and chaos end up everywhere. Crumbs ground into the carpet, sticky handprints on the walls, and cushions thrown from one end of the living room to the other. I usually spend the following morning scrubbing stains out of the couch and picking toy pieces out from under the furniture before I can even think about my own weekend. Whenever I try to ask for advance notice or set reasonable boundaries, Laura starts crying about how overwhelmed she is, and my parents immediately accuse me of not being supportive enough. Over the years, I've worked incredibly hard to build a successful career in marketing. Recently, I was offered a promotion that would mean longer hours, more responsibility, and additional travel. I was excited and hoped my family would finally be proud of me. Instead, my mother immediately asked, "But what about the twins? Your sister needs you here." Laura chimed in without missing a beat. "You can't take that job, Emily. Who's going to help me with the boys?" I couldn't believe that was their first reaction. My father simply shook his head and said, "Family should come first, Emily." My mother followed with her usual line, "Your sister has 2 children to raise. You don't even know what being tired really feels like." When I finally tried explaining how overwhelmed and burned out I had become, Laura accused me of being jealous of her life and her children. Then she added, "You're just bitter because you're still single." As if my relationship status somehow determined my worth as a person. I sat there quietly absorbing all of it, feeling that same familiar mix of frustration and exhaustion I had felt so many times before, wondering how a moment that should have been a celebration of my hard work had once again turned into a conversation about everyone else's needs but mine. After one especially exhausting weekend with the twins, I finally decided I deserved to do something for myself. I booked a beach vacation for the following month. By that point, the boys had already managed to destroy my laptop and leave permanent marks all over my couch, and I desperately needed a break. I knew I desperately needed to get away. After searching for a while, I found a small, modest resort in Georgia that seemed perfect for the quiet, relaxing vacation I had been dreaming about. I pictured myself reading on a lounge chair with no one tugging at my sleeve, eating meals slowly without cutting anyone's food first, and falling asleep at whatever hour I wanted without worrying about who might need me the next morning. It wasn't extravagant, just a simple room near the water, but in my mind it already felt like the most peaceful place in the world. During our usual weekly family dinner, I casually mentioned my plans. The moment I did, my mother's eyes lit up. "Oh, that's perfect. We should all go together. The twins would absolutely love the beach." Before I even had a chance to object, Laura was already making plans as if the trip belonged to everyone. She immediately started assigning me responsibilities. "You can take the boys swimming while Ryan and I get some time to ourselves," she said, acting as though it was completely natural that my vacation would turn into another babysitting assignment. My parents didn't hesitate to join in either. They even offered to upgrade my reservation so we could all stay at a larger resort together, completely ignoring the fact that I had planned this trip to get away from everyone. Within minutes, they were discussing activities, restaurants, and outings based entirely on what the twins would enjoy. That night, lying awake in bed, I finally made a decision that changed everything. Instead of canceling my vacation, I secretly booked a completely different resort on a quiet little island. I told no one about the change. From that point forward, I carefully prepared everything in silence, researching flights late at night with the brightness turned down on my phone screen and clearing my browser history afterward just to be safe. I requested time off from work, packed my luggage without anyone noticing, tucking it away in the back of my closet between uses, and made sure my emergency savings were easily accessible. I knew some people would probably call it dishonest, but I'd simply reached my limit. At the airport, my family would believe we were all heading to the same destination in Georgia. Instead, while they boarded their flight, I would quietly board a completely different one. I disabled my location sharing ahead of time because I already knew exactly what was coming. Yes, there would be drama. Yes, they would be angry. Yes, they would probably make me feel guilty. But for the first time in my entire life, I wanted to choose myself. For 33 years, I had been the dependable sister, the obedient daughter, and the aunt who was always available whenever someone needed a favor. To meet my family's expectations, I sacrificed my weekends, my social life, and my own happiness, and my own. I missed countless dating opportunities because I was always babysitting. I turned down career opportunities that might have interfered with my family's demands. Time after time, I put my own life on hold so I could be there whenever they called. This wasn't just about taking a vacation anymore. I was trying to escape a lifetime of being taken for granted. I hoped this trip would become the turning point that finally allowed me to establish healthy boundaries with my family. Maybe I even needed a complete break from them for a while. I was exhausted from constantly sacrificing my own needs, always being the reliable one, and forever serving as everyone's backup plan. So, Reddit, what should I do? Am I overreacting? Is it wrong to want something different for myself? Or should I simply accept the role my family has assigned me and continue living the way they expect? After my first post, I was overwhelmed by all the advice and encouragement I received. Thank you to everyone who took the time to respond. Since then, a lot has happened, and I wanted to share how everything unfolded. Although my plan worked exactly the way I intended, the day at the airport was far more emotional than I expected. I arrived early on purpose and checked in at a different counter, well away from where my family would be. From a distance behind the terminal's glass walls, I watched them arrive together. Ryan was looking over the reservation details. My parents looked excited about the trip. Laura was trying to manage the twins while dragging several suitcases behind her. As soon as they headed toward their check-in line, I quietly made my way through security for my own flight. Not long afterward, my phone began vibrating nonstop. The first messages were simply confused. Where are you? We're at gate B7. Then they became worried. Emily, are you okay? Did something happen? Finally, the anger started. How could you do this to us? The boys are crying. Right before my flight took off, I powered off my phone completely. For the first time in years, I experienced a strange mix of overwhelming guilt and incredible freedom. The guilt wasn't new. I had been carrying that burden for most of my life. The freedom, though? That feeling was completely new, and it was exhilarating. The peaceful little island where I was staying couldn't have been more different from the crowded tourist destination my family had chosen. There were no crowded buffet lines, no lines for rides, no groups of families shuttling children from one activity to the next. Instead, there were quiet paths lined with palm trees, a handful of small cafes, and a beach that never felt overwhelmed by noise. The moment I stepped onto the beach, years of stress seemed to melt away. There were no twins to entertain, no family drama to manage, no schedules to organize. There was only the sound of the ocean, the warm sun, and complete peace. Ironically, the first couple of days were harder than I expected. I kept catching myself looking at the time and thinking, the twins are probably eating lunch now, or Laura usually needs help getting them ready for bed around this time. Breaking decades of conditioning wasn't easy, but everything shifted on the third day. I started doing things I had always wanted to try but had never made time for. I signed up for a surfing lesson, and even though I was terrible at it, I laughed through every minute, falling off the board more times than I could count and swallowing far too much salt water. I joined a yoga class on the beach at sunrise, stretching out on a mat in the cool morning air, and ended up becoming friends with several other solo travelers who were also learning how to enjoy their own company for the first time. One evening, I even had an unexpected dinner with an interesting man I met at the resort's coffee shop. It was nothing more than a casual meal, but it reminded me that I actually had a life outside of my family's constant demands. 4 days later, I finally turned my phone back on. That was when the real shock hit. I had over 200 text messages waiting for me, dozens of voicemails, and 112 missed calls. My mother had even contacted my workplace, claiming there was a family emergency. Thankfully, I'd already told my supervisor I would be completely unavailable during my vacation. I listened to several of the voicemails. My mother's messages followed a predictable pattern. She started out sounding worried, then became furious, and finally switched to guilt and manipulation. Emily, how could you abandon your family like this? The twins are heartbroken. Is this really how we raised you? Laura's messages were somehow even worse. You've ruined everything. The boys won't stop asking for Aunt Lizzie. I couldn't handle everything myself, so Ryan had to cut his meeting short. One message, though, stood out from all the others. It came from my father. For the first time I could ever remember, he didn't immediately defend Laura or pressure me to fix everything. Instead, he simply said, "Emily, please let us know you're safe. I don't understand what's happening." That message affected me more than I expected. I sent one brief text to the family group chat. "I'm safe and I'm having a wonderful vacation. I'll contact everyone after I get home. Please respect my space." Then I muted the conversation again and went right back to enjoying my trip. The next 4 days changed my life. Instead of reading bedtime stories to the twins every night, I finished 2 novels of my own. Instead of rushing home to help with baths and bedtime routines, I spent every evening watching the sunset. I talked with new people without constantly being interrupted, and little by little I finally began processing years of emotions I had buried deep inside. I even started keeping a journal, something I had never taken the time to do before. On my last evening at the resort, I had dinner at a small beachside cafe. An older waitress noticed I was eating by myself and kindly asked if I was comfortable being alone. After I gave her a brief version of what had brought me there, she smiled and said something I'll probably remember for the rest of my life. "Family is important, honey, but not if it costs you your own well-being. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose yourself first." Those words stayed with me. When my vacation ended, I didn't go straight back to my apartment. I knew a confrontation with my family was unavoidable, so I booked a hotel room for 3 nights to give myself time to prepare. During that time, I updated my emergency contacts at work, had the locks on my apartment changed, and, most importantly, wrote down the boundaries I intended to set so I wouldn't lose my nerve. Unfortunately, my family figured out I'd returned because I accidentally liked one of my coworkers' social media posts. Within just a couple of hours, my mother and Laura were outside my apartment building, repeatedly buzzing my intercom. Instead of answering, I watched them from the window of my hotel room across the street. It felt strangely surreal seeing their dramatic performance from a distance while remaining completely detached from it. I decided to meet them the following day at a neutral coffee shop instead of my apartment. I knew the conversation wouldn't be easy, but I had rehearsed exactly what I wanted to say. Every time I thought about it, my hands started shaking. Even so, I also knew that for the first time in my life, I was choosing myself. Despite the guilt, the anxiety, and the inevitable drama, I believed I was finally doing the right thing. I'll share another update after I talk with my family. And honestly, thank you, Reddit. Your encouragement gave me the confidence to take the first real step toward becoming independent. The meeting happened exactly as planned, and somehow it turned out to be even more intense than I expected. I arrived at the coffee shop early and chose a table tucked away in the corner, where I could easily see both the front entrance and the emergency exit. Years of dealing with family conflict had made that kind of planning second nature. I ordered a coffee I barely touched, mostly just holding the warm cup between my hands to keep them from shaking, and I read through the notes I had written to myself one more time before putting them away. My hands were trembling so badly that I could barely hold my coffee. A few minutes later, my parents walked in with Laura and, to my surprise, Ryan. Thankfully, the twins weren't with them. Before anyone could launch into the speeches I knew they had prepared, I took a deep breath and calmly said the words I had practiced over and over. "I'm setting boundaries, and they aren't open for negotiation." The next 2 hours became a perfect example of emotional manipulation. Laura immediately burst into tears and claimed my disappearance had deeply traumatized the twins. My mother shifted straight into guilt. "After everything we've done for you?" Unexpectedly, Ryan tried to play peacemaker. He suggested a compromise where I would only babysit every other weekend, as though reducing the burden somehow solved the real problem. For most of the meeting, my father barely spoke. He simply sat there looking uncomfortable. Then Laura finally said the sentence that changed everything. "You're being selfish? Family means sacrifice." Something inside me finally snapped. For the first time, I answered without anger, without raising my voice, and without apologizing. Yes, family does require sacrifice, but it's supposed to go both ways. When was the last time any of you sacrificed something for me? The silence that followed was overwhelming. No one had an answer. For the first time in my life, I laid everything out in front of them. I talked about always being second to Laura. I reminded them about the unequal financial support. I explained how my time, my career, and my life had always been treated as less important than everyone else's. Then I pulled out my calendar from the previous year. Nearly every single weekend was blocked off for babysitting. Every holiday had revolved around Laura and her family. My mother tried cutting me off. But that's what aunts do. For the first time ever, I refused to back down. "No," I replied. "That's what paid babysitters do. And if you need this much help, Laura, maybe it's time to hire one." From that moment on, the entire conversation shifted. Laura stormed out of the coffee shop in tears, and my mother hurried after her. To my surprise, Ryan stayed behind. He admitted they had taken advantage of my willingness to help for years. After sitting quietly for several moments, my father finally looked at me and said, "We never meant to make you feel this way." It wasn't the apology I needed, but it was more honesty than I had ever heard from him before. After the meeting, I followed through with a plan I had already put in motion. I moved to another part of the city and rented a new apartment. It was smaller than my old place, but it was located in a secure building with a doorman who already knew about my situation. The rooms were mostly empty at first, just a mattress on the floor and a couple of boxes I hadn't gotten around to unpacking, but there was something comforting about the quiet, about knowing that nobody could show up unannounced or let themselves in. Only my employer and a small group of close friends received my new address and phone number. Oddly enough, relocating wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was realizing I had to rebuild an entire life from scratch. For years, I had devoted almost all of my free time to my family. I barely had any close friends. I had almost no hobbies. So I started small. I signed up for pottery classes. I joined a local book club. I finally accepted dinner invitations from coworkers that I had spent years turning down. My first weekend with complete freedom felt strange. I stayed up late simply because I could. I wandered through a farmer's market with no schedule to follow. I spent hours browsing a bookstore without worrying that someone would call demanding I come babysit. For the first time in years, there were no urgent messages from Laura. No guilt-filled phone calls from my mother. No last-minute request to drop everything and rescue someone else. My family's reaction to my move was exactly what I expected. My mother tried calling me through my company's main switchboard, only to discover that my new position didn't allow personal calls during work hours. Laura even showed up at my office one day, but security had already been informed about the situation and never allowed her inside. Later, she mailed me a long, emotional letter, accusing me of destroying the family. The biggest surprise came from Ryan. He sent me an email sincerely apologizing for the role he had played in enabling everything. At first, Laura resisted the idea of Ryan taking the twins to activities on weekends by himself, but eventually she accepted it. It wasn't a huge change, but it was a meaningful one. My parents, however, are still struggling to adapt. Every now and then, my dad sends me awkward text messages trying to start a conversation. My mother continues swinging between angry outbursts and complete silence. Just last week, she left me a voicemail saying, "When you're finished with this little rebellion, we'll welcome you back." She still doesn't understand. This isn't a rebellion. This is my life now. Without constant family interruptions, I've been doing much better at work. I'm more productive, more focused, and far less stressed. My supervisor noticed the difference and recently trusted me to lead a major new project. For the first time in years, I've also started dating again. I'm taking things slowly, but it feels good to finally make room for my own personal life. The biggest transformation, though, has happened inside me. The constant anxiety that used to follow me everywhere has finally started to disappear. I've been exercising regularly, eating healthier meals, and sleeping better than I have in years. And yes, I finally started seeing a therapist. I am slowly recovering from what my therapist calls chronic family stress syndrome. For so many years, I carried the weight of constantly being needed, constantly being responsible, and constantly putting myself last. Last weekend, the twins sent me a small gift. Inside were handwritten notes telling me how much they missed me. It was honestly heartbreaking and sweet at the same time. Even though it brought up a lot of emotions, I stayed firm in my decision. I carefully wrote them back and explained that I love them very much, but I also need time to take care of myself. I had to write those words even though I know there is a chance Laura may never actually read the letter to them. Yesterday, I ran into an old friend who I hadn't seen in a while. She looked at me and said, "There's something different about you. You seem lighter. You look years younger." And she was right. Despite the angry messages, the attempts to make me feel guilty, and the emotional pressure that still occasionally comes my way, I feel freer than I ever have before. I'm finally realizing that love shouldn't feel like a life sentence. Real love means respecting someone's boundaries, recognizing their needs, and offering support both ways. It should never be based on one person constantly sacrificing while everyone else benefits. My new apartment will officially be 6 weeks old next week, and for the first time in my life, I decided to host a small housewarming party. Nothing extravagant, just a few friends from my pottery class, my book club, and some coworkers. I spent the afternoon before the party, arranging string lights along the balcony and setting out small bowls of snacks, taking my time with every little detail simply because I wanted to, not because anyone was demanding it of me. It was a strange, quiet kind of joy, realizing that this small gathering existed purely for my own happiness. There will be no expectations, no drama, no pressure, just people who appreciate me for who I actually am. I'll share another update soon. And once again, I want to thank everyone on Reddit who gave me the courage to finally change my life. Update 3. It has now been 4 life-changing months, and I wanted to share how everything has developed since my last update. The conversation I had been both fearing and expecting finally happened last week. My father unexpectedly showed up at my workplace. His approach was completely different from Laura's emotional reactions or my mother's previous attempts to pressure me. When he asked if I would have lunch with him, he seemed calm, almost defeated. We met at a quiet cafe near my office. For the first time in my entire life, I felt like he was looking at me as his daughter, not as Laura's younger sister, not as the family's backup plan, not as the person everyone could rely on, just me. "You look healthy," he said, almost surprised. Then he added, "Happier." The fact that he was only noticing now after all these years was painful. It made me realize how much of my unhappiness had gone unnoticed. After a moment, he explained that the family had come up with a proposal. They were willing to make compromises if I agreed to return to my old role in the family. He said I could have every other weekend free. He even mentioned that they would pay me for my time watching the twins, as if turning my sacrifice into a financial arrangement would somehow make everything acceptable. That was when I realized they still didn't understand. Sitting across from him, I finally saw the truth. They didn't view my independence as something I deserved. They viewed it as something they could negotiate for. "Dad," I told him, "I'm not negotiating my freedom. I'm living it." The conversation that followed was probably the most honest discussion I've ever had with my father. I explained how years of being compared to Laura had affected me emotionally. I told him about the moments he had forgotten or never noticed, the dreams I gave up, the achievements nobody celebrated, the birthdays that were overlooked, the times I felt invisible in my own family. His reaction surprised me. He didn't argue, he didn't defend their choices. He just sat there quietly for a long time. Finally, he said, "We thought we were doing what was best for the family. We never realized how much we were hurting you." It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was the first time I had ever felt truly acknowledged. Then he asked about my life now. That was the moment everything changed. For the first time, he actually listened. I told him about my pottery classes, my promotion at work, and the new friendships I'd built, describing the little details that had come to fill my days, like the smell of wet clay on my hands and the sound of laughter from my book club meetings. I showed him pictures of a vase I had created, its surface uneven and slightly lopsided in the way that only a beginner's work can be, and I honestly wasn't expecting much of a reaction. Then he said something that completely caught me off guard. "You built a good life for yourself without us?" I could hear both pride and sadness in his voice. At the end of lunch, we both accepted that things could never go back to the way they were before. Before leaving, he gave me the first sincere hug I could remember receiving from him in years. "I hope someday we can be part of your life again," he said, but on different terms. That conversation seemed to trigger another wave of family conflict. After my mother found out about our lunch, she started another round of emotional attacks. She began telling relatives that I needed an intervention because I was supposedly having a breakdown. Laura started making passive-aggressive posts online about selfish sisters and broken families, clearly upset that our father supported my choices. But something was different this time. Their words didn't control me anymore. My new life gave me a perspective I never had before. I could finally see their behavior for what it was. They weren't trying to save me. They were trying to regain control over someone who had finally learned how to live independently. My new apartment truly feels like home now. The walls are covered with pottery projects, photos of my chosen family, and memories with people who respect my boundaries and appreciate me as I am. A small shelf near the window holds every piece I've made in class so far, uneven bowls and lopsided mugs that I'm still proud of, each one a small reminder that I finally get to choose what fills the space around me. At work, I've even started mentoring newer employees, helping others grow instead of repeating the unhealthy pattern where I was always the one giving support and receiving nothing back. The biggest change has been how I spend my time. My weekends belong to me now. I've started learning Spanish. I joined a local hiking group. I've even started dating someone who respects my boundaries and appreciates the person I am. For the first time in my life, I'm building a future based on what I want, instead of what my family expects from me. Last Sunday, the twins sent me another homemade card. It was obvious that Laura had helped guide what they wrote. The message was filled with sad comments about how much they miss their aunt. In the past, something like that would have sent me into a spiral of guilt and doubt. This time, I responded differently. I wrote them a loving but honest letter. I told them that even though I may not be involved in their everyday lives like before, my love for them has never changed. I explained that sometimes adults need to take care of themselves too. According to my therapist, I am experiencing what she calls post-traumatic growth. I'm not just moving on from the past. I'm building something stronger and healthier because of what I survived. She has helped me understand that I am not responsible for fixing my family's dysfunction. The newest development happened yesterday. Ryan, Laura's husband, contacted me. He wanted me to know that my decision had actually changed things inside their household. Not because he blamed me, quite the opposite. He said they finally hired part-time help with the twins, and he has become much more involved as a parent. Ryan believes the changes are better for everyone, although he admitted Laura is still struggling to adjust. Right now, I'm sitting in my home office preparing for a business trip next week. A year ago, that sentence would have been impossible. Behind my desk is a framed quote that perfectly represents my journey. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is set yourself free. I want to thank everyone who followed my story and supported me through this process. You gave me the confidence to finally make my own choices. If you are in a similar situation and wondering whether wanting your own life makes you selfish, please remember this. Wanting freedom is not selfish. Taking care of yourself is not cruel. Setting boundaries is not betrayal. I don't know what my relationship with my family will look like in the future. Maybe one day we will build something different. Something based on mutual respect instead of obligation. For now, I'm focused on protecting the life I've created. My friendships, my interests, my career, and most importantly, my sense of self. This isn't the end of my story. It's only the beginning. And for the first time in my life, I'm excited to see what comes next. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss more shocking real-life stories.